Hello everyone, my name is Xinyi. Today I am presenting the effect of feedback consistency on learning in children. In a previous study in our lab on learning in adult and children, we presented two event-related potential components associated with feedback consistency in learning, the feedback-related negativity, FRN, and the fronto-central positivity, the FCP. Our results suggested that the ability to use feedback effectively to facilitate learning is a developing ability. In this study, we look at only the children. We evaluated whether the consistency of feedback affects learning outcomes and feedback processing in children, and the extent to which measures of working memory and self-efficacy are related to children's ability to withstand instances of inconsistent feedback during learning. In our study, we recruited 119 children between the age of 7 to 10 years old, and we asked them to do a sorting task while we collect their EEG data. In the task, participants were asked to sort different items into the yellow or the blue bins based on their category. In the consistent condition, feedback was consistent with our participants' response, while in the inconsistent condition, 80% of the time the feedback was consistent with participants' response, but 20% of the time feedback was wrong. So, for example, if the participants sort the candy into the yellow bins and got negative feedback, the participants were expected to learn that all the candies go to the blue bins. In the consistent condition, all the feedback were accurate. However, in the inconsistent condition, 80% of the feedback were accurate, while 20% of the feedback were wrong. In addition to EEG, we measured participants' working memory with two subtests from the SEL4. Number repetition, which measure numerical working memory, and familiar sequences, which measure verbal working memory. We also measure participants' self-efficacy with perceived control in the SPOCQ. Perceived control measures participants' recognition of control in life. In the EEG, we use a 32 electrode wet-net EEG to collect data. All the data were time-locked to the beginning of feedback presentation, and we use spatial temporal principal components analysis to elucidate the two ERP components of interest. The FRN, which elicited at about 250 to 300 milliseconds after the feedback presentation, and the FCP, which is elicited at about 300 to 400 milliseconds after the feedback presentation. In our result, we found that in general, participants perform better under the consistent condition than the inconsistent condition, and only in the consistent condition, older participants perform better than the younger participants. In both conditions, participants with better working memory did better in the task, and although self-efficacy did not help predict task performance, we found that participants who had better working memory had higher self-efficacy, indicating that those with better working memory perceive themselves as having better control in life. In the EEG data, we first look at the grand average waveform to determine the location of FRN and FCP in both conditions. And then we perform a spatial PCA to identify the spatial distribution of our two components. These virtual ERP were spatial factor scores representing the spatial variance at each electrode. We then use these spatial scores to conduct a temporal PCA and select two factors that best represent FRN and FCP. Our analysis showed that regardless of the condition, FRN was more negative in the negative feedback than for the positive feedback, meaning that FRN amplitude was larger in the negative feedback than in the positive feedback. On the other hand, regardless of feedback, FCP has a larger amplitude under the inconsistent condition than in the consistent condition. Relating these results back to accuracy, we found that in the consistent condition, larger accuracy was associated with smaller FRN to positive feedback and larger FCP to positive and negative feedback. However, we did not find any relationship between accuracy and ERP in the inconsistent condition. We also found that the accuracy differences between the consistent and inconsistent condition were positively correlated with amplitude difference in FCP to negative feedback, meaning that greater accuracy difference were associated with greater FCP to negative feedback difference. This suggested that participants who were more susceptible to the inconsistent feedback has larger change in accuracy between conditions and larger change in FCP to negative feedback, meaning that they were more affected by the change of condition. And since we saw a relationship between ERP and accuracy in the consistent condition and that working memory was related to accuracy in both conditions, we examined the relationship between working memory and ERP and expected to find a correlation in the consistent condition. We found that in the consistent condition, better verbal working memory score were associated with smaller FRN amplitude to positive feedback and larger FCP amplitude to negative feedback. And we did not find such relationship in the inconsistent condition. This result led us to examine the relationship between ERP and self-efficacy in the consistent condition, since in our result presented in the previous slides, self-efficacy and working memory were correlated, but we did not find any correlation. So in summary, our participants did better in the consistent condition and were all somewhat confused by the inconsistent condition. Comparing older and younger participants, although older participants performed better than younger participants in the consistent condition, sorry about that, younger participants were not more susceptible to the inconsistent condition than older participants. So connecting to our previous study on adult and children, we do found differences in performance between adults and children in both conditions. But in our current study, we did not see an age effect on the feedback consistency. We think that it could be that the age range in this study was not wide enough, and that difference could be shown in later age. Looking at the EEG data, FRN was found to be larger in the negative feedback than the positive feedback. On the other hand, FCP was found to be larger in the inconsistent condition than in the consistent condition. Such relationship was not found in the FRN. And relating back to accuracy, our participants who were more susceptible to feedback inconsistency tend to elicit larger FCP to negative feedback in the consistent than in the inconsistent condition. And under the consistent condition, participants who elicit smaller FRN to positive feedback and larger FCP to positive and negative feedback achieved higher accuracy. Last but not the least, working memory was found to be a predictor of participants' task accuracy in both consistent and inconsistent condition. Moreover, in the consistent condition, FCP to negative feedback and FRN to positive feedback were found to be correlated with one measure of working memory, which is the familiar sequences. Although self-efficacy was not found to be a predictor of task performance, it was found to be positively correlated with working memory. So These results suggested that FRN could be more related to immediate processing of feedback, while FCB could be more sensitive to the learning environment. It seems that in the consistent condition, immediate feedback processing could benefit performance, while in the inconsistent condition, learning was disrupted, and that participant needs to rely solely on working memory to perform in the task. And that concludes my presentation. Please feel free to ask me any questions. Thank you so much for listening.